I'd like to start by telling you about one of my greatest friends, Okoloma Madwewesi. Okoloma was the person I could argue with, laugh with, and truly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I did not know exactly what this word feminist meant, and I did not want Okoloma to know that I did not know. So I brushed it aside and I continued to argue. And the first thing I planned to do when I got home was to look up the word feminist in the dictionary. I wrote a novel. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well-meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. He told me that people were saying that my novel was feminist, and his advice to me was that I should never call myself a feminist because feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. Then an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture, that feminism was an African, and that I was calling myself a feminist because I had been corrupted by Western books. Now, men and women are different. We have different hormones, we have different sexual organs, we have different biological abilities. Women can have babies, men can't. At least not yet. Men have testosterone and are, in general, physically stronger than women. There's slightly more women than men in the world. About 52% of the world's population is female. But most of the positions of power and prestige are occupied by men. In the recent US elections, we kept hearing of the Lilly Ledbetter law. And if we go beyond the nicely alliterative name of that law, it was really about a man and a woman doing the same job, being equally qualified, and the man being paid more because he's a man. So in a literal way, men rule the world. And this made sense 1,000 years ago. Because human beings lived then in a world in which physical strength was the most important attribute for survival. The physically stronger person was more likely to lead. And men in general are physically stronger. Of course, there are many exceptions. But today we live in a vastly different world. The person more likely to lead is not the physically stronger person. It is the more creative person, the more intelligent person, the more innovative person. And there are no hormones for those attributes. A man is as likely as a woman to be intelligent, to be creative, to be innovative. We have evolved, but it seems to me that our ideas of gender have not evolved. But it is one thing to know intellectually and quite another to feel it emotionally. Each time they ignore me, I feel invisible. I feel upset. I want to tell them that I am just as human as the man, that I am just as worthy of acknowledgement. These are little things, but sometimes it's the little things that sting the most. Gender as it functions today is a grave injustice. We should all be angry. Anger has a long history of bringing about positive change. But in addition to being angry, I'm also hopeful. Because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to make and remake themselves for the better. Gender matters everywhere in the world. And I would like today to ask that we begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world. A world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. And this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently. We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity becomes this hard, small cage, and we put boys inside the cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear. We teach boys to be afraid of weakness, of vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true selves. What if both boys and girls were raised not to link masculinity with money? What if the attitude was not, the boy has to pay, but rather, whoever has more should pay? Now, of course, because of the historical advantage, it is mostly men who will have more today. But if we start raising children differently, then in 50 years, in 100 years, boys will no longer have the pressure of having to prove this masculinity. But by far the worst thing we do to males, by making them feel that they have to be hard, is that we leave them with very fragile egos. The more hard man a man feels compelled to be, the weaker his ego is. And then we do a much greater disservice to girls because we raise them to cater to the fragile egos of men. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man. We're all social beings. We internalize ideas from our socialization. Even the language we use in talking about marriage and relationships illustrates this. The language of marriage is often a language of ownership rather than a language of partnership. We use the word respect to mean something a woman shows a man, but often not something a man shows a woman. We teach females that in relationships, compromise is what women do. We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs or for accomplishments, which I think can be a good thing, but for the attention of men. We teach girls that they cannot be sexual beings in the way that boys are. If we have sons, we don't mind knowing about our sons' girlfriends, but our daughters' boyfriends, God forbid. We police girls, we praise girls for virginity, but we don't praise boys for virginity. And it's always made me wonder how exactly this is supposed to work out, because and this is the worst thing we do to girls, they grow up to be women who have turned pretense into an art form. The problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be, rather than recognizing how we are. Now imagine how much happier we would be, how much freer to be our true individual selves if we didn't have the weight of gender expectations. Boys and girls are undeniably different, biologically, but socialization exaggerates the differences, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling process. Now take cooking, for example. Today, women in general are more likely to do the housework than men, the cooking and cleaning. But why is that? Is it because women are born with a cooking gene? Or because over years they have been socialized to see cooking as their role? Actually, I was going to say that maybe women are born with a cooking gene, until I remembered that the majority of the famous cooks in the world, who we give the fancy title of chefs, are men. Now today, there are many more opportunities for women than there were during my grandmother's time, because of changes in policy, changes in law, all of which are very important. But what matters even more is our attitude, our mindset, what we believe and what we value about gender. What if, in raising children, we focus on ability instead of gender? What if in raising children, we focus on interest instead of gender? I have chosen to no longer be apologetic for my femaleness and for my femininity. Gender is not an easy conversation to have. For both men and women, to bring up gender is sometimes to encounter an almost immediate resistance. Some of the men here might be thinking, okay, all of this is interesting, but I don't think like that. And that is part of the problem. That many men do not actively think about gender or notice gender is part of the problem of gender. That many men say, like my friend Louis, that everything is fine now. And that many men do nothing to change it. If you are a man and you walk into a restaurant with a woman and the waiter greets only you, does it occur to you to ask the waiter, why haven't you greeted her? Gender matters. Men and women experience the world differently. Gender colors the way we experience the world. But we can change that. I think very often of my dear friend, Okoloma Madoewesi. And he was right that day many years ago when he called me a feminist. I am a feminist. And when I looked up the word in the dictionary that day, this is what it said. Feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. A feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better.